Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a courageous and compassionate 20-year-old son, Joe, who is launching into young adulthood. I'm walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach helping primarily adoptive parents. Joe and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. And this week's episode is going to be complex. Hang on. This is a complex story with deep implications. So I wonder if any of you listening have ever known someone who was relinquished and adopted, and then relinquished and adopted again. In today's episode, we'll find out what it takes for someone that happens to recover from not one, but two abandonments. Whew. So today's guest is Julian Washio Collette. He was adopted as an infant and then relinquished and adopted again at age 9. He's a former Catholic monk and currently lives in a tiny house in Portland, Oregon, where he is a member of an intentional community that serves the needs of the unhoused and socially and economically marginalized. Julian is an excellent writer, blogging about spirituality, adoption, and healing at his blog site called Peregrine Adoptee. And he was one of the adoptees featured in the new book, Adoption Unfiltered, which is how I first met him. So I'm so glad you're here to share your story with us and your healing journey. Julian, welcome to Unraveling Adoption.
Thanks, Beth. It's great to be here.
Well, you're the first person I've ever known, really, that is a double adoptee. Is that how you refer to yourself?
Yeah, I do. I say double adoptee or a twice adopted person.
Okay.
I've never heard double adoptee used before, so I may have coined it. As far as I know, I have. But
very good.
I've also never met another double adoptee. So.
Oh, you've never met one?
I have not.
But we know that it happens. Do you know the percentage of times it happens?
You know, that's something I should explore, but I don't.
But we know that it happens. You're not the only one in the world that this has happened to.
Right.
And especially if we get talking about fostering, then that happens sometimes many times, like 14 different placements, right? That happens. But adoption is an extra legal arrangement.
Yeah, I think for me, especially, I want to add that both of my adoptions were closed adoptions. So in that sense, it's very different than foster care because my birth certificate was changed. Even in my second adoption, no one from my first adoptive family could legally have contact with me.
Really?
Until I was an adult. So it was, So to me, that's very different than being fostered.
That is very different.
Yeah.
Wow. That is, wow.
Yeah.
So what parts of your story would you like to share with us? Help us understand how this happened and how you are still moving forward after all of that.
Yeah. Well, in a nutshell, so my first adoption, the elements of my story are fairly common for the time. My mother was a teenager, first year in college. She had a one-night stand with a man, got pregnant, told her parents. Her parents sent her to a maternity home, didn't even tell her own brothers. So it was very, very secret.
Wow.
Yeah, she had me. Didn't see me after I was born. I was brought to her 24 hours later, and she was given 10 minutes to hold me.
Wow.
But she says I slept through it. So
you're the baby. Oh, okay.
And this is where things get really fuzzy. I think for many of us, there's a lot of fuzziness to our story. I know that I was formally adopted. My adoption was made official 14 months after I was born.
Okay.
I don't know when I arrived at the house of my first adopters. I don't know where I was beforehand. So there's just a lot of fuzziness. Yeah. And things I just don't know. And I don't have access to those records, unfortunately.
Wow. You have no idea. That's terrible. So you could have bounced around in foster care for all we know, right?
Yeah.
Or you could have been with them the whole time. You just don't know.
Exactly. There could have been another dissolved adoption for all I know, too. And just to say, I'm estranged from that family, so I don't have anyone I would ask.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah.
It must feel so strange. And I know this happens to a lot of adoptees, particularly intercountry adoptees, where there's like swaths of time that are just gone. And that just must feel weird. How does that feel to an adopted person that just has a blink?
Right. So I'll address that by kind of moving forward first. So just to say, again, the circumstances around my second adoption are also a little fuzzy to me. I was 9 years old, but there's things that I don't remember. There's stories I've been told that I can't validate. But the basic story is, and I want to say, I also have an adoptive sister, and she was adopted when I was about 4.5 years old by the first family, and also adopted by the second family. So she is the other double adoptee that I
so
know.
you do
I
know one
didn't
other
think of
one.
that. So I do know
Wow.
one other one.
Wow.
Yeah. So those parents got divorced. I don't know how old I was, maybe 7, maybe 8. We were left with our adoptive mother. And here's where the fuzziness comes in. I know that she was working as a nurse. She was going out late at night. We were with babysitters more than we were with her. From what I've been able to piece together, it gets, especially I think for a 9-year-old child, she was going to what I would call fire and brimstone fundamentalist churches, while also doing drugs and going dancing and dating a lot of men. So it was a very, just a lot going on. And at some point in that, she decided that she didn't want to have children anymore. And I reunited with her briefly in my late teens. Needless to say, it didn't go well. But I surely asked the questions of like, well, why did you place us for adoption? Why did you give us up? And I don't remember any of those conversations or her responses, even though I know I had them. So I think part of the fuzziness is also just me not being able to hold that information for one reason or another. Of course, it's very traumatic. So kind of going back to your question, like there's the fuzziness of the things that I don't know, that I can't know. But there's also even a more damaging fuzziness of, at 9 years old, basically having my whole life up until that point erased. And then having to become a completely different person with completely different parents. So I think that's a degree of fuzziness, or you can call it identity dissonance. That's quite impactful.
I would bet.
So
very impactful. So your mother relinquished you at 9. Did you go right away to another adoptive family, or did you spend time in a group home or foster?
Sure, we did. So a social worker would come and pick my sister and I up and drive us to the home of our second adopters. I don't know how many times that happened, maybe 2, 3, but at one point she picked us up and she dropped us off and she drove away.
And that was it.
And that was it.
And you didn't say goodbye to your first, like there was no saying, okay, kids, now you're going to go. No. Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that at one point my first adoptive mother sat us down and explained this to us. To the extent that we could comprehend what was happening. I think that happened before the social workers stepped in and all of that. So, that's another thing. I don't remember the day that I left my first adoptive mother.
Your brain protected you. It's like, cannot compute.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, I do remember arriving that day at my second adopters, because I remember that I had my pet hamster on my lap. I remember the jacket I was wearing, but I don't remember leaving the house.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, my heart just aches for you. That just sounds so hard. How to even start to process that when you're 9? What are you, like in 4th or 5th grade at 9, huh? 3rd.
I think I might have been tail end of 3rd.
3rd grade.
Yeah.
You're just a baby.
3 or 4.
Oh, God.
Right.
That's just terrible. And how did it go at your second adoptive family?
Well, I'd like to be able to say that it went well, but it didn't. It was actually quite an abusive family. Yeah. And so, again, like, I remember shortly after the adoption playing chess with a psychologist. So there was some attention to what was happening, but really no one was paying attention because they didn't place us in a safe home. And pretty soon all of the support dried up and we were just left to our own devices.
Were you and your sister both abused? And did you kind of cling to each other? Was it nice having your sister there with you at least? You had one person come with you, or was that not ideal either?
No, we were both abused in different ways, primarily by our second adoptive mother. But it didn't draw us together. I think it split us apart, as often happens. So I think for me, just the weight of all of that abuse aside, I withdrew. That was my way of coping. And I think I also felt a lot of guilt that I couldn't protect my sister. So I think just all those complicated factors, we kind of, I mean, we're still in touch now. We're not particularly close, so we're not estranged. but it wasn't a situation where we both kind of clung to one
Okay.
another for support. I think we were just shell-shocked, for lack of a better word.
You're just in survival mode at that point.
Yeah. I mean, our whole identity was shattered, each one of us, and then we had to pick up the pieces on our own. There was no help.
Was it in a different town or just across town, or?
Yeah, we were only 7 miles away from my aunt and uncle.
Really?
Yeah.
Your birth aunt and uncle, or your first adoptive aunt?
No, first adoptive.
Oh.
Yeah.
But they couldn't have taken you.
Well, so again, here's the stories that I heard when I reconnected with some of them as an adult. They claim that they would have taken me, but they were not given the option.
Oh, really?
That our mother didn't even tell them until it was already too late. Yeah. There's a lot that I can't validate. What I feel very confident of is that they did not want to be cut off from us. They wanted to stay in relationship. And I don't know who was making the decisions. I think it was just an incredibly harmful decision to make, to just say no to them.
And you were so close. Oh, man.
Exactly. We were only 7 miles away.
Wow.
Yeah.
It just seems like everybody failed you. The social workers, obviously your parents, first adoptive parents, and then the second adoptive parents, and teachers. Did teachers know what was going on? Like, did they say, hey, let's check on Julian and his sister. Are they okay? No. Did you have to change schools at 9?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
A whole new school.
Yeah.
Did they change your name?
They changed my middle and last name.
Oh, okay.
So I kept my first name.
Okay. So Julian's always been your first name?
No, I changed that when I was a monk, but perhaps we'll get to that later.
Okay. Yes. I remember why you said your name is Julian. Okay. Right. So your first name stayed, but then you changed it as an adult. Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know how you survived. Do people say that to you? Like, how does a 9-year-old psyche handle that? Like, who is there for you? Or was it just your spirit, your core being kept you alive? How did you literally survive that?
Yeah, that's hard to answer in terms of when I was a child, how I got through. I never bonded with those parents. I mean, you could say I bonded out of guilt, out of fear, out of trauma, but there was no real bond. Okay. And to be honest, I think that was a good thing in its own way.
You just stayed distanced.
Yeah.
Just got through.
So I just stayed small and stayed out of the way as much as I could until I could get out. Yeah.
Okay. Now you mentioned chess. Were you I know you're writing and you sound like a super smart person. Is that kind of where you went? Were you kind of hanging out with the nerds that did chess, that kind of thing? I think nerd is positive nowadays, right? It's good to be nerd. So
I guess. No, I wasn't. I mean, I think eventually as a young teenager, my whole life was like punk rock music and skateboarding. But I didn't actually meet other people like me or connect with them until, maybe 18, 19.
Oh, okay.
So I was kind of a loner even in that.
Okay.
But I think that was, in a way, it was the world I withdrew to.
Sure. You had to find something.
Exactly. The music gave me an escape, but also a kind of visceral mirroring of what I felt inside.
Yeah.
And then the skateboarding gave me a physical outlet.
Yes. That sounds really great. Like if a psychiatrist would have thought of ways to help you, those would be 2 good ways, right? Angry music, and something very physical. Wow. And you just were drawn to those 2 things. Wow. And then you became a monk. How old were you when you became a monk?
I think I was 32.
Oh, okay.
32 or 33.
What did you do between high school and 32?
For a while, all I did was skateboard and go to punk rock shows. And looking back, I appreciate those handful of years because it was the closest thing that I had to a childhood. A little late, but better late than never. I actually got into healing and spirituality pretty early on. I dated a woman who was in Al-Anon and OA, Overeaters Anonymous. So I was introduced to 12-step programs, and I listened to your interview with Ridgehouse, and I know he had a similar experience. He went to adult children of alcoholics meetings. So I started going to those in my early 20s. So it didn't get to the adoption piece. I would share about my family, but when I spoke about my family, I simply meant the people who did not know me until I was 9 years old. I wasn't really conscious of bringing adoption in the room. There was no one who could help me. The irony is that I don't even know if there was alcoholism in my family. All I know is when I read the literature of alcoholic families, it was like, that's my family.
That checks out. Okay. Wow.
So it was actually really helpful. And I did that pretty intensively for a few years. And then concurrently with that, I was introduced to a Zen Buddhist meditation group And so I started meditating a lot and eventually doing retreats, eventually going to monasteries, spending some time in a Zen Buddhist meditation center. So yeah, I think that's kind of where I took my pain, my anguish, my existential questions. And I think there's some ambiguity there. I think there's also a kind of escapism because I didn't know how to connect with the world or address questions that other people my age were addressing, like livelihood, relationships, family. I was not, I just sat on a cushion,
Yeah. It is a way to escape into yourself, but escape nonetheless. You're not talking to anybody when you're at a 3-day silent retreat, right? It's like, yay, I don't have to talk to anybody. Did you fall into addiction at all yourself, or were you able to hold a job? How did your day-to-day life look at that point?
Sure. I've never had a substance addiction. I would say that I had codependent relationships with women. There's a woman, Susan Anderson, who writes about abandonment, and she has this term called abandaholic. Abandaholics are people who have this sixth sense that can just pick out in a crowded room the person who will abandon them, and they will be instantly intensely attracted to that person. I had that. I was an abandaholic.
So you found the people that would replay your abandonment over and over and over
Exactly.
again. Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been painful for all involved.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So how did you switch from Zen Buddhism to Catholicism?
So I arrived at the monastery in November of 2001. So I was 31 years old. I was literally just bicycle camping. I did a lot of bicycle camping. I loved it. I was bicycle camping down the California coast. I felt this very strong intuition that I needed to stop at a Catholic monastery. It was that specific.
Wow.
But I didn't know where one was, and I wasn't particularly looking. But I came upon one in Big Sur, California.
No kidding.
And I stopped, and they offered me a job on the maintenance crew. I was raised nominally Catholic, so I had that in my background.
Okay.
So yeah, for the first 15 months, I was on the maintenance crew. So shortly after I arrived, I had a very powerful spiritual experience. And it was kind of a combination of very meaningful synchronicities, feeling embraced by a loving presence. And the cool thing about being where I was that I was in a place that validated those kinds of experiences. And not only that, had ample resources for integrating them.
Nice.
So I had a mentor for 6 years, very wise, empathetic man. He was a monk. So he was tremendous help to me. And here's where the name Julian comes in my exploration of the writings of the Christian mystics. Julian of Norwich, 14th century English mystic, really stood out to me. For one, she writes very eloquently about God as mother, which really hit a core wound and a core longing in me. And I just think her writings, more than anything else I came across, just resonated with my experience and what I wanted to grow into. Again, I was just following my intuition. I never had a sense that I was going to take permanent vows. And I didn't. I did take temporary vows. I was in monastic formation for 4.5 years. But when I became a novice, it's traditional to take a name, and I chose the name Julian, which was really cool on so many levels. Like one, there was a communal ceremony to acknowledge it. So, it was acknowledged by the community. And for me, I don't know many, but certainly some adoptees do change their name, often if they knew it, to what their birth mother may have named them. For me, naming myself after Julian of Norwich, it's a different kind of lineage. Like I had lost my biological lineage. I needed something deeper, or at least other than biology. So in the Catholic world, the continued presence of the saints and the deceased was very powerful for me. So there's just a sense of drawing my identity, drawing my lineage, drawing my sense of purpose from this 14th century woman and all that stands behind her. So it was very powerful and very significant. And then when I left the monastery, one of the first things I did was change my name legally because I wasn't going back.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Well, I don't know what your earlier names were, but Julian totally suits you. I can't imagine you anything else. So, And I love what Catholics do really well is ceremony. They know how to do the smells and bells really, really well. And it can really just solidify and impact people in a very meaningful way. It sounds really beautiful, your experience with them. And it sounds like you left not, I don't know, was there drama when you left, or you just decided to move on with your life? And
No, yeah, not at all. Well, I wanted to just jump on something you just said.
sure.
I think it's really important because, again, I was raised nominally Catholic. I was never, until then, a practicing Catholic until I arrived at the monastery. But both of my biological parents are Italian. The monastery I was at belongs to an Italian congregation, so it has an Italian flavor. So when I got to the monastery, I mean, it was a very different form of Catholicism than the kind of Catholicism that pushed my mother into the maternity home, right? So it was a very open, progressive place. And I got to experience the symbols, the stories, the rituals, as you say, something that reaches your senses, your imagination, your intuition, your whole being, your body. So it goes deep. I got to experience all of that in this very meaningful way. And I really do think it was a kind of homecoming because I do think that we receive not just a biological inheritance, but a cultural inheritance from our biological parents. So there was a sense of homecoming to my, in one sense, my native religion, but I think even deeper than that, the culture of my biological ancestors. And I did feel that. Yeah.
I bet it felt deeply connecting after a life of disconnection. You found something to connect with. That's beautiful. Well, I've never known someone adopted twice, and I've never really known a monk before. So clicked off two buttons for me.
It's an interview of firsts.
Well, you're fascinating. I think what we're going to have to do is just bring you on another time because there's lots more to talk about. I want to talk about psychedelics with you. I would love to talk more about your writing. I'll put a link to your peregrine adoptee. And peregrine means unsettled, right? Like traveling. Is that right?
Yeah, wanderer, migrant.
Wandering, yeah.
Yeah, alien.
You deeply connect with that kind of energy from your experiences, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So I'll put the blog site on the notes. And I think that we just need to bring you back another time and do some more of this. But I think your story is incredibly sad. I am so sorry for all that the world has handed you. It's like no one deserves anywhere, none of what you received at all. And you deserve so much better. But that's what got handed to you as a child, and you had no control. And I'm just so moved by how you just kept going. You found communities, the punk rockers, the skateboarders, the Zen Buddhists, the monks, and now you're in this intentional community. I'm sure that provides you a sense of community as well. And you found your way.
I'm also married, yeah.
And you found a wife. Very good. Very good.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of in awe is what I'm trying to say, that you have figured out how to do your life with so much adversity, especially at the front end of it. So I'm glad to know you. I'm learning from you all the time, and I will continue to watch your writings and pay attention to whatever you're doing. So, well, thank you for sharing your story. I know it probably takes a lot of emotional energy to churn this over again and again and again and to put it out into the world. But I think it's so important for people, especially adoptive parents, allies, teachers, social workers, to realize there are humans on the other end of what we're doing.
Right.
And it has such a huge impact. Yeah.
Yeah. If I could make one point, since you brought that up, I think anyone could look at how my second adoption was handled and say that that was just really, really awful. But it wasn't handled any differently than my first adoption. I just couldn't speak up.
Right.
I don't recall it. My body remembers, but I can't recall. I didn't have a voice.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would like to think that at least closed adoptions, as we've known them, are going away. But I think it just really speaks to how much the system did not care.
Yes. Yes. So many people along the way have failed you. I'm so sorry.
Right. Well, not just about me. I mean, the adoption industry.
The whole system
was just getting babies into people's hands.
Yeah.
No real concern for a lot of it, I have to say, a lot of it I think was ignorance too, but certainly no concern for the birth mothers either.
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah.
Gosh. Oh, well, I am holding you in my heart, and I know everyone listening is too. And we just hope that I don't know what I hope. I hope that you continue to find yourself. And I'm so impressed that you're able to come out and share your stories to help other people. That's very courageous of you. And thank you so much for being on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed this.
Make sure and find Julian's writing at peregrineadoptee.wordpress.com. I'll put that link in the notes. You will love his writing, and you can get a hold of him through that website as well. And please find Unraveling Adoption at unravelingadoption.com. Sign up for our email list. And I wanted to let you all know that we have an event coming up on February 17th, 2024 about Sacred Medicine 101 for the adoption constellation. So any of you who are interested in the therapeutic and sacred use of psychedelics, come hear one of our former podcast guests, Miyok Ikaro, facilitate a 90-minute webinar. Information about that event or any other events, especially if you're not listening to this in February 2024, can be found at unravelingadoption.com/events. Thank you all for listening. Please share this episode with anyone you think might benefit from hearing this story and might wake up a little bit more to adoption's complexities with Julian's story. Thank you very much for listening again. And Julian and I want you all to stay safe.